All right. Well, Tony, thanks a lot for being with us this evening. And let's actually start with the question about 9/11, because we were just talking about 9/11. And what do you remember about 9/11? Where were you, and what do you remember about the day?
I was at work, working for Walmart. I was actually in the back. I think I was stocking some paper product. I was working in paper that day. And me and the guy that stocked milk, our paper products was right there next to the milk, and he come back, and usually a really fun guy to hang out with and work with, and he had a different look on him, and he said, "We just got bombed." And I was like, "What?" And of course, our Walmart had before they had the McDonald's and all in it, and we had a kind of a area that you could go and eat popcorn or pretzel or something like that and sit down, and they had a big TV up there. Retired gentlemen usually hung out there in the mornings, and they had a big screen up there, and he's like, "No, come up, you got to look at this." And we all go up there, and of course, by that time, the entire store and everybody in it was around the TV, and it was actually showing it on the TV.
Had
we were
both
watching
towers
it.
been hit by that?
No,
Or
only
just
one. Only one. Yeah, we were actually watching it. If I remember right, it's kind of a blur because you don't know. They kept showing it over and over. But I do think that the live footage of, where they pan over to that next one where they see it, was actually the first time that was seen, and that's when everybody kind of looked and said, "Man, this is real bad." This isn't an accident. At first it was kind of, maybe it was an accident. One plane, and then that happened, and everybody was
Did
like,
you actually saw the second plane hit?
well, like I said, they showed it over and over that day.
I see,
So,
right.
but I think we were still under that mindset that, this may have been an accident.
Yeah.
We didn't even know that. I kind of thought that it was maybe a small plane, and it just
Exactly.
somebody didn't know it. I don't know.
I think some of the early reports were even that.
Yeah, and that's where we were mentally, and then I do specifically remember the mindset changing and saying, "No, this is something."
So I'm sure the store stays open, right? But
the circuit, the radio circuit went over. Just like today, you always have the Walmart lingo going on and the music, and they're talking about sales or whatever, and they actually changed it to actual national news.
To the news.
So the entire store was showing on all the TVs in it, and it was showing it, and you were able to hear it to keep the customer up to date. And
wow.
so that was kind of neat.
So that was 2001, and so what year did you go into the Army?
2006.
So you went into the Army in 2006, and so why did you go in the Army?
I guess there's three main reasons. One, I felt like I was kind of left out. My generation, I felt like we were left out of, not that you want to have something to have to step up for, but my generation, it was kind of quiet. We were on the heels of Desert Storm, and after Desert Storm, there really wasn't. It was really quiet. I mean, the Clinton era was pretty peaceful.
Yeah.
And this come about, I just kind of felt like I missed my opportunity with my generation where there wasn't anything to do for your country. And I just felt like it was something I wanted to do, needed to do. Secondly, I guess it was just, my father was in Vietnam, my grandfather was World War II, and I just wanted to have that.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a part of that as well.
So for you, it was very much a service thing, and obviously in 2006 the country's at war. I mean, 2006 in Iraq, things were pretty rough in Iraq in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
2004, 2005,
Mm-hmm.
2006 things were pretty rough. And so was that part of your mindset? Not only do I want to join the Army and get the GI Bill and all that stuff, but I want to join the Army.
Right, I wanted there to be
and get to Iraq or Afghanistan.
Yeah.
You wanted to be active in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Did you think going in that you might, were you thinking from the outset this is a one enlistment thing, or maybe I'll do 20 years, or is it kind of a do the enlistment, do your bit, and you're done?
I think I probably toyed with the fact that I might career, but I don't know if I ever was,
Yeah.
that's definitely what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And then once I was in, I kind of felt like it wasn't going to be a career.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, I guess I thought about it at first.
Yeah. All right, so you joined in 2006. Let's just jump down to, I think there's a later question here. When did you actually go? It's the fourth question down. When were you in Iraq? And then, of course, I indicate there are 2 deployments. So what were your 2 different deployments in Iraq?
October, let's see, Halloween of 2006, I flew in. I spent Halloween in Kuwait, which was just a little bump before you actually fly into Iraq.
Yeah.
We spent Halloween there in Kuwait, and then we got back January of '08
Wow.
due to
So
the extension.
End of October 2006 to January 2008.
Right.
So 15-month tour.
Right, that was the extension tour that we got the extension when they did the surge.
Did you know that when you were flying over?
No.
So you got extended while you were there?
Right. We were about 3 months in, 2 months in.
So tell the students about that, because that was called, well, that was related to stop loss, right, I think, right? Where they didn't even allow, like if there's some guys, if their enlistments ended, it's like.
I got stop
sorry.
loss the second tour.
Oh, you got stop loss the second
Yeah.
tour? All right, well, so tell the students about this. So 2006, you got the surge. Basically, we heard about the surge last week, but remind us what the surge was. And then let's talk about when the news comes down that your 1-year tour is going to get extended to 15 months.
The surge was basically just putting every asset that was available on the ground. They saw that the actions that were taking place over there, if they were fortified with more troops, more artillery, more of everything, that we could probably put it in a place where, I don't know if victory would be the right word, but you could definitely get to a point where we had a lot more control. And they saw that the best way to do that was to throw everything we had at them all at once. So that was essentially the surge. He pulled all assets that were available and so you basically went from, say, a single brigade in a specific area would then go to 2 brigades in an area.
How many soldiers would be in a brigade, roughly?
A brigade, oh man, you're going to make me think back to, I hope I'm accurate with.
You guys know how many are in a brigade?
A brigade's probably,
A lot.
a brigade's probably, I'm going to say between 5,000 and 7,000 probably.
Okay. So in one area where you've got.
It may not be quite that much.
Yeah, okay.
But it's big, yeah. I mean, it's the higher echelon under division, so it's
Yeah.
it's
So
a lot.
surging forces in, but of course, if you're surging all the forces in, then you're surging in all that equipment
Right,
and all the rest. The idea being to kind of, overwhelm the insurgents with
Right.
numbers.
Right.
So you were part of that.
hmm
And then, how far into your 1-year tour did you get the word that you were going to be extended another 3 months?
I want to say it was December, right before Christmas.
So, like, the
he-
worst time to get that kind of news, right?
Yeah, probably
You
it
were
was.
extended, yeah.
Yeah, I guess what made it worse was the fact that you're already kind of counting down, and you go in there with the mindset of 12 months. You've already got a couple under your belt, and you're eating away at that year, and then all of a sudden, now I've got to spend more than a year left over what I've already
Yeah,
stayed here. So that, I guess, was probably what made it the hardest.
that was part of the
Was
surge.
the mental. You had to kind of, instead of knowing you only had 10 months left, you had to go back to, I got a year and 2 months left.
Wow.
So you had to,
And now,
you went backwards almost.
yeah, did the Army notify your wife, or did you have to deal with that yourself?
I did. They had ways of doing that as well. Usually spouses are on, kind of, the colonel's wife would typically kind of have what would you call it, like a teardrop of, she calls somebody, that person
Yeah.
calls 2 people, that person calls 4 people,
Yeah.
and it gets down. And information would get out that way. But
Wow.
it would be quicker for us just to tell, so we would, when we called home,
Yeah.
we were told before, I was at brigade level, so I got a little bit more intelligence than some that were in company level. And it was kind of the scuttlebutt that it's going to happen. There's going to be a surge. So we kind of,
Yeah.
we knew that there was the opportunity there for that to take place.
Yeah.
So,
Did you, in that 15 months, did you get to go home?
yes.
Okay, for like 2 weeks?
Yeah, I think I told you 2 weeks in the video, but I think it was 10 days. I talked to my wife about it.
Oh, okay.
I think it was 10 days.
Two-ish.
Yeah, yeah.
Something like that. Was it harder to come back? Was it harder to come back after being back in the States for, just 10 days than it was leaving the first time?
No, because I guess you almost felt like family was over there. You were almost letting them down,
Yeah.
It was kind of I got to get back
We've
into
heard that.
it, and I gotta get back into my piece,
Yeah.
So
We've heard that from other vets who say a similar thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now coming back, the second tour, initially leaving was
Yeah.
probably the most difficult because you knew what was ahead and
Mm,
the struggles and all that, and you were kind of seasoned, and
yeah.
so
That second tour was also a year?
it was for 12 months.
12 months, but you said you got stop loss.
I got
for
stop
that
loss
one.
during
So
that one, yep.
What is stop loss then?
They implemented a stop loss, which stop loss is always, as far as I know, it's always been there. It's not something that had ever really
It's in the paperwork.
it's
when you
basically
sign it.
kind of a backdoor draft. Since they had the draft in the other wars, it wasn't, I guess, needed
Yeah.
because they just outright drafted you.
Yeah.
But with the draft not in, they pulled back to the stop loss. Stop loss is basically if you had so much time left when your unit was deploying, you basically had to spend the deployment with that unit. So
Right.
if you got out in 2 months and your unit was deploying 2 months prior to your exit date, well, you got to stay 10 extra months with your unit.
Yeah,
So-
and it's in the paperwork. When you
Yeah,
sign
it's
up,
all in
the
there.
paperwork,
There's a lot of
so-
stuff in there.
Yeah, they
So
can
it's
do
about that thick.
But it's the only time I know of when it's actually been active.
Yeah, it's never
Yeah.
been needed.
So the first time you got extended 3 months, the second time you got stop loss. So
Mhm.
how much time did you spend in the Army altogether then?
I want to say 4 years, 2 months.
Okay.
4 years, 2 months.
Let's go to this question. What was your job in the Army?
Forward observer. I was
Forward
with,
observer. So tell us what that was.
somebody said it, 13 Fox, who said that? All right.
Yeah.
My brother's job.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, 13 Fox. It was the nomenclature is 13 Fox.
Uh-huh.
13 series artillery. Basically, forward observer is the eyes of the artillery. Calls for fire, sets coordinates for fire missions. Basically, artillery is the big piece, the big gun. They don't see what they're shooting at. They don't have a scope. They don't actually see their target. It's
Right.
too far away.
Right.
We're talking miles.
Yeah.
So there has to be a piece out there that's radioing back to them and telling them, the adjustments that need to be made so that they get the actual round on target. So
So
that's
maybe
the
you've got a guy with the infantry out there
Mhm.
who actually has eyes on the target, calls back to you, you set the coordinates, and then the artillery comes out.
Right, and I was brigade level, so you have the company level, which is he's out with the actual artillery unit or the infantry
So are
unit.
you're talking forward observer, 2 forward observer then?
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
you're
well,
talking your-
Not always.
Okay.
Not all.
yeah.
Other people can call fire in as well. It didn't have to be a forward observer,
Okay,
but
yeah.
typically you do want a forward observer out there.
Yeah.
He's the most educated
Yeah.
on it. So,
Did you sometimes get calls in from like helos?
Oh, yeah.
Air assets, that they'd give you the coordinates as well?
yep.
Yeah.
You get it from drones. You get it from really any aircraft
Yeah.
that if they saw something and they thought, that it needed artillery, they would.
Then you'd send it out.
Yep.
On a typical fire mission, how long would it take? So you get the call from the drone, from the helo, from the guy in the field. How long would it take between getting that call and then actually sending the artillery out?
Well, you had two different types. You had counterfire, which was you're firing on an actual battery that's probably firing back at you or firing at someone within your area of operation.
Yeah.
That was counterfire, so it's just as the term, you're firing after you've been fired on. Those we had 6 minutes. We never wanted to take that long because typically they're out of dodge by 6 minutes.
Like they hit you with a mortar.
Right.
And they know if they stay there, they're going to get hit, so they take off.
Right.
Yeah.
We typically, when we were there with our actual paladins, we were about 3 minutes. That was, we could break 3 minutes sometimes, but usually it was right around that 3 minute, which our paladins were really, really good guns. When you got into, there would be reserve units come over, National Guard units, or even other units that weren't attached directly to us that trained with us. It was always a little bit slower because it just, it's kind of like a basketball team or a baseball team that isn't always playing together. You're a little bit different. Your way of doing things is a little bit different.
Yeah.
So.
And did you guys have to be worried a lot about rules of engagement?
Yes.
So just tell the students, when you just hear that rules of engagement, Iraq, 2006, just whatever pops in your mind first.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that, but I just kind of mentioned on the counterfire.
Oh yeah.
The actual fire missions, they could take days. You could pre-plan those for days, even weeks.
Oh, okay. So we have intel that
Right.
guys, there's an ID factory over here.
Right.
We're gonna hit it. It's Monday. We're gonna hit it on Wednesday.
Right.
Something like that. Okay.
And then even if someone's calling, if there's a FO out there calling to me, if they're not under direct fire, you're going to take a lot better time. So you make sure you get all your P's and Q's,
Yeah.
Where if they're under fire, then it goes a lot quicker, so.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to
Yeah,
touch
yeah,
on that.
the
Yep.
immediate-
It could, if it was just, there were a lot of targets that would be, you were just kind of showing your force. You were showing your muscle,
Yeah.
and you were saying, hey, if you mess up, this is what we can do to you. We wouldn't even shoot anything specific. We might pick an old farmhouse or something that was
Oh,
dilapidated and
just kind of
just,
marketing.
right, you'd almost use it as a training if you knew they were in that area, but
Yeah.
hey, don't act up because we see you,
Yeah.
we're still here.
Yeah.
So those would take sometimes, like I
That
said,
makes sense.
you didn't get in a real hurry for those.
Yeah.
So
We've talked to a lot of Vietnam vets in this class, and one of the themes of the Vietnam vets is frustration with the rules of engagement. That a lot of times they felt like they had their hands tied. We had one vet, they're taking fire across the demilitarized zone from North Vietnam into South Vietnam. They can't fire back.
Mhm.
Just crazy stuff from the perspective of the ground soldiers just seems absolutely crazy. Did you guys have rules of engagement like that? That just, you maybe understand it, but on the other hand, this is a war?
yeah, the thing that we probably dealt with rules of engagement was what the enemy used for their areas of attack, what they used to set up in. They knew what we would shoot, what we wouldn't. They knew what we were legally able to shoot, what we weren't. So a mosque, schools, hospitals, they typically went for those type areas.
So that they'll set up in mosques, they'll set up in schools, they'll set up in hospitals, because they know that you're going to be really reluctant to fire on those persons.
Right.
So
Right.
they use the rules against, yeah. But now, though, if it becomes clear that that's happened, then the rules do allow, okay, you can hit it, or, even if the mortars, for 30 minutes are coming out of that mosque, still you can't hit it?
I never ever remember us firing on a mosque at all. It was just kind of, you were pretty much committing suicide, so to say, if
Yeah.
you shot that, because it was going to be broadcast in a totally
Yeah,
different
right.
light.
Well, I guess that's the thing. Whatever damage is coming from the mortars out of that mosque won't be as great as the damage of
Right.
the international news programs announcing that, we just, blew up a mosque.
Right.
But you're saying that the insurgents know this, and so
Right.
they'll take advantage of it.
Yep. And it wouldn't always be that they would, I think there were a lot of mosques that, they probably wouldn't allow them as much as
Oh,
you.
yeah,
I guess
yeah.
the elders of that particular township
Yeah.
would, kind of, no, you're not going to use that.
Yeah.
But they would get really close,
Right.
close enough that artillery would impact it.
Oh, I
So
see.
you're still kind of, usually your no-fire areas, you had a radius of so much, and
Oh,
the
okay.
bigger the no-fire area usually was the more important of the
Yeah.
collateral damage was more important.
Sure.
What you could do to that particular area was, like you said, it was going to hurt you more than what's coming
Yeah,
from it.
yeah.
And there were other ways of, once you get kind of a pattern going, there were ways for us to counter that.
Gonna do
That
it.
wouldn't create such
Eventually
an
they're
artillery
gonna
type collateral.
Eventually, they're going to come out of the mosque, for example.
Right.
So put a sniper on
Right.
or something like that. Yeah.
Right, they would set up.
Yeah. So let's look at this question. What was the purpose of being in Iraq? And I guess what this question is just about what's in your head, what's in the head of the soldiers you're with when you're asking the question, 8 months into a tour, it's 120 degrees outside, and you're like, so what are we doing here, right? What's the point of this, right? What answer did you guys have when you're thinking about that?
I guess as late as I went in, once it got that deep into the conflict, it was more of or the war, it was more of you were trying to win the hearts and minds at that point.
Mm.
You were trying to set up a government or help them to establish a government that would in turn be able to govern for themselves without any help from an outside entity as us. You're trying to build the army back up, like you talked about. You broke it down. Now you're trying to build it back up. Lots of training. We conducted lots of training with their army.
You did?
Yep.
You trained with your unit trained with Iraqi forces? Or?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep. We did some. I didn't personally,
Right.
but we did do some. Our guys did go out and they would do.
So
some
it
stuff.
sounds like your sense was that we're not really fighting Iraqis. We're helping Iraqis to be in a position where they can take control of their own country. We're fighting the people who want to prevent that from happening.
Right.
We're fighting
Right.
the people who don't want Iraq to be a somewhat stable, somewhat well-functioning country.
Right. By that point, it kind of had turned into you weren't really fighting Iraq. You were fighting people that didn't want an Iraq.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That makes sense. Now let me see. Let's just go back to the question about your two deployments. So your first deployment, Halloween 2006 through January 2018. Second deployment?
Is basically all of 2009.
So 2009.
So we left.
Yeah.
We left right after Christmas 2008, or 2008 Christmas. So I want to say it was January 2009, and we come back
Yeah.
January-ish,
Yeah.
maybe early February of 2010.
When you went back in 2009, did it feel like progress had been made?
It was a lot quieter.
Okay.
Everything had settled down quite a bit.
Yeah.
It was more of a police state then rather than an actual war going on. There were still some hot spots in areas,
Yeah.
but where I was, it was a lot quieter.
Things had calmed down, and I think, all the troops withdrew in 2011, I think, if I remember right. So things were calming down, and the story at the time was that the surge had worked. Right?
Yep.
That the surge had been successful.
Yep.
So, so practically then that means for you, your second deployment, just a lot fewer missions, a lot fewer fire missions?
Oh yeah, we didn't fire. We probably would, in that first deployment during the surge, we broke lots of records for amount of artillery fired. Now a lot of that was pre-planned target type things like I was talking about. It wasn't all counterfire or
Yeah.
it was a lot of pre-planned, but we were steadily firing somewhere at something.
All the time. That's 2006.
Right.
Yeah.
The next one, 2009, was very, very quiet.
Mm.
There was very little counterfire the entire deployment.
Yeah.
And then pre-planned and stuff would still come up, but nothing like
Yeah,
the first one.
yeah.
2 different administrations though.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And there was a whole different mindset with the Obama administration compared to the
Really?
Bush
So, I mean,
administration.
so talk about that a little bit. How would you describe the different mindset under the, because President Obama comes in, I guess, January 2000, takes office January 2009. So what was the different, what did you detect as sort of a different vibe, coming from the new president in the White House?
Well, I mean, a lot of it had to do not just with the administration, but where we were in the war. But
Yeah,
it seemed like, under the Bush administration, it was a little more, I don't really know what the word is. It was a little more, that administration was willing to fight to where it
little
seemed
more
like,
aggressive.
right, aggressive, yeah, that's a good word. To where the other administration, when they come in, it was kind of like they wanted it to all settle down, and nothing wrong with that. I think we were at a place where we were all ready for that, but they saw that because of where we were with the war, it was a good place to start. Was let's try and mellow this thing out and
Yeah,
not create problems where there's not problems.
sure.
And they kind of saw the direction it was going, and it was kind of one of those, hey, if you're not fired on, don't fire. To where on the other, it was, we're gonna beat them to the punch. A lot of times we're gonna, but there was a lot more aggressive enemy under the Bush administration as well. And again,
Yeah.
I don't think that has anything to do really with the administrations
Right.
as much as just where the war
No,
was
I mean, it
at the
seems
times
like
of
the
the
insurgents-
administration.
The surge had worked, and, but there might be something to this thing, because, I mean, President Obama did, he did indicate early that he wanted to wrap the Iraq thing
Right.
up, He saw Afghanistan as really the vital war, and the Iraq thing was something to wrap up. So maybe you picked up a little bit of that. Let's go to this question here. We won't go through all these questions. Let's just go through a few more. But veterans often say that there was a moment. Usually it's really early when they get to the country, when the war is no longer kind of an interesting TV show or something that we're talking about in training, but this is for real. Sometimes Vietnam vets will say, I don't think it was in this class, but a different context. I can't remember, but the Vietnam vet, the guy got off the plane, and within 5 minutes, a mortar shell came in. So that's the moment. For him, it was like, this thing's for real. What about for you? Was there a moment when that sort of that realization that this isn't just an interesting news program, but this thing is for real?
Yeah, I think when when we flew out of Kuwait, you'd fly into Baghdad. Basically, it was Baghdad International Airport that was taken over by us. We pretty much had the perimeter of it, which Baghdad International Airport's a really big airport. There were lots of almost like camp type setups around it. You'd fly from Kuwait into Baghdad, and then you'd stay in Baghdad for maybe a week or so, waiting for your flight out or your convoy out to wherever you were actually going to be placed. And when we were there at the, I think it was called, they got code names for every little entity, but I think it was the airport they called Catfish. We were waiting to go out, and basically it's just a Chinook. Usually there's tandem Chinook groups come in.
So the helicopters.
Right.
Yeah.
And they'd carry, I guess, 30, 35 guys. So you would have 2 Chinooks come in, they would sit down, 35 guys would get off, they would walk past you, they would check the helicopter, and then 35 guys would get on, and they would go backwards. Basically, you were replacing whatever was coming in, just all day this was going on.
So guys leaving, guys coming in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, you're just rubbing shoulders as you're just changing out. And we were sitting there waiting for the plane, and they had us in formation, and we heard them come in, and they pulled us back into formation, got us ready. And, they'd done told us what all we were going to do. When they get off the plane, they'll call us. We'll get back, or on the helicopter. When they get off, the flight coordinator is going to call you, and then you're going to go on in single file line. We all knew what to do, no big deal. And when the guys got off, they got off with two guys, I think it was two or three guys that were in the traditional Iraqi dress, where they wear the I know it's not called a dress, but that's the best way I can describe it. A dress and the head wear, and well, I can't say the head wear because they had bags over their head, blindfolded bags so they couldn't see. Hands behind their back, ankles shackled, and at gunpoint they were a high priority target because they were really making sure nothing happened to them or that they didn't do anything dumb. And they brought those off beside us, and just seeing that, that's the kind of stuff I always saw on the news. You would see that type of outfit and the bags on their head with it tied, and you can just tell they're looking around trying to figure out what's going on and where they're at. And I guess that was kind of my wake up to this. We're not in training anymore.
Yeah, this is for real.
Yeah. So, and that was my first. That was my first flight out of Baghdad. So everything was new to me from that point on, anyway.
Right. Yeah.
So that kind of hit home.
It's one of those memories that sticks with you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I can see it right now.
Yeah, I bet you can. How would you? Let's go to this third from the bottom question here. How would you just characterize the war? Just as somebody said, obviously you're just speaking about it from your own perspective, what you saw. But somebody just said, well, just describe that war. Like World War II, we could talk about big armies clashing. It's if we are tomorrow where the Germans are today, we're winning. That kind of thing. You describe the war that way, or the air war, whatever you're part of. How would you describe this war?
It was it seemed like for the majority of at least the first deployment, like I said, the second deployment was very, very slow in comparison, which is a good thing in war. But the first one, it seemed to go in, there would be real bad weeks, and then there'd be a couple of really good weeks where, nothing popped off, you didn't lose any guys. And then there'd go another week where it seemed like, 2 or 3 from your brigade or your company were getting hit. And it was the kind of stuff that I guess they were always, with this war, I guess our intelligence would gain those 2 or 3 weeks where it got slow. It seemed like every time they would figure out a way, and then we'd figure out a way to counter it. And about 2 weeks, it'd take them to figure out a way to counter what we countered, and they would figure out a better way. So then we'd have to, okay, they're doing this now, so we got to figure out a way to better that. Take for instance, I don't know if you ever heard of the Rhino on the end of the Humvees. It was a heat sensing device. Well, they were putting out their IEDs were being put off by heat sensing. So when the engine got into the realm of the IED, it would tell it to go off. And of course, when it went off, it's going off right at the engine or right behind the engine, which is where soldiers sit. So then they said, okay, well, we want these to go off before we get to it. So we'll drop this big Rhino. So all the Humvees had this big long arm with heat sensing or a heat emitting box on it.
So the IED then will blow.
Right.
5 or 6
So the
feet in
IED
front
would
of them.
it would blow, and the Humvee wouldn't even have been there yet. Well, they started figuring out, okay, we got to put a delay on our IED setup. So then okay, we're going to drive faster. When we get to these points, instead of driving slow like they're used to us, we're going to drive faster. So then they're like, okay, so now we need to go back to just the heat because they're driving faster. So there was always.
It sounds a lot like Vietnam,
Yeah, it was a cat and mouse type game.
It's classic insurgent fighting, right?
Right.
These folks, they can't take you on head to head, and so they're just gonna do this clever stuff to just
Right.
wear you down.
And there was never like you were talking about in World War II, you could take a field and say, okay, we moved, we're closer. There was never that with this war. You might own a place for a month and have no problems, and then you start getting lackadaisical in that area, and then boom, you get hit with one of the worst casualty hits that you've had the entire time, where it's been quiet for a month. So you didn't have that where, okay, we own that, we feel safe in that area. You never could do that. There was never that sense of security in any respect. Even with the locals, if you kind of got a feel for what the locals were on your side or going to help you, it could change any minute. There was nothing that was...
Because you don't know if the insurgents have been among the locals.
Right, whatever would change the dynamics would possibly change it. And
what you just said, it fits a little bit with what an Iraq vet said last week. I said characterize the war. He said boredom and chaos, right?
Yeah.
So you've got these quiet times, but then instantly it can just go to insanity.
Yeah.
But what you're adding to that, or what you're also saying, is that your sense is that those quiet times, that's when the insurgents were figuring out what new ways to hit you guys.
Right.
So then they act on their new thing. The scrap goes on for a week or so, then it gets quiet again.
Right. You figure out how to combat
process, how they can respond to this new innovation from the Army, and then the Army has to respond to the new innovation from the insurgents, and it just keeps going.
Exactly.
It keeps going like that. Did you feel, of course the Vietnam guys, a common theme with them is that they didn't feel like the country supported them. Not only were the protests going on during the war, but they came home, and some of them had to deal with, awful stuff when they came home. How about you, when you're going through the airport in uniform, when you're out in public in uniform, did you feel that the country supported you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was a whole different...
How did that show up? What would people say, or what kinds of things would they do?
Lots of handshakes in the airport.
Yeah.
Usually the men and, lots of ladies would just acknowledge you and tell you thank you.
Yeah.
In passing. They may not even, introduce themselves or anything, just as they're passing by.
Yeah.
Just thank you for your service as you're walking by. To the point it almost got to where it was a hindrance. You just were nodding the whole time,
Yeah.
Now that's the South. I always flew into the South because I grew up in the South. That's where I was going home.
Mm-hmm.
The guys that went to some of the places, it seemed like up north, I did have one of my real good sergeants, he did have some negative things happen to him in the airport, kind of similar to what you hear about the Vietnam vets dealing with. Not near on the scope. I'm sure there was still, 9 to, or 1 to 10 would be negative, and another 9 would be all positive. To where the Vietnam War, it was probably the opposite.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did have buddies that would have stories of, people calling them baby killers or spitting on them or whatever. I never experienced that.
That would be
though.
maybe New England or California. Seattle,
I hate to say a state because I don't want it to. I mean, again, it was not like the entire state.
Sure.
Oregon is where he was from and where he kind of got that. Again, I don't hold that against Oregon. It's
right.
That happened in Arkansas. It happened in Oklahoma. I didn't. It didn't happen enough for me to see it.
Right. But your personal experiences, that folks.
Nope, my personal experiences were always very.
I
honestly don't know of a negative remark that was made towards me.
Yeah. I think let me see if the students have any questions, and then I think I'll just do the one more here. But anybody have a question for Tony right now? Yeah, Joe.
What are your interactions with the locals like? I mean, just on day-to-day basis?
Interactions with the locals?
I was actually pretty fortunate. The first tour, I did very little with local nationals. I did do some guarding of local nationals. They would hire them to do work around the post. and one of my jobs was you had to always keep an eye on them. So they had to have armed guards with them because you never knew exactly who the vetting was there, but it wasn't just great. And their system of like we have, you could show your ID and it's going to pull everything up that you've ever done. They didn't have that system there, so your vetting was not like it would be here. So you still had to, we caught guys that were trying to get in to do the work that were not there for the work. They were there to try and find out information, maybe even infiltrate themselves somehow.
So these are Iraqis who were working on the base, doing custodial work or something on the base?
Usually they were doing, it was manual labor type stuff that we would have, cleaning up an area, removing debris, things like that, typically. Very seldom would you let them in the buildings, just for that reason. You just couldn't keep an eye on them. We didn't have enough soldiers we would usually have 2 soldiers to about 30 individuals, so you had to keep them all.
So
right
were
together.
you, restricted to the base then? Are you living like within a fortified base most of the time? You're not, like a lot of guys in Vietnam, there'll be local villages where they'll go out and hang out in the villages, but you're not.
No, they wouldn't allow us. Again, it was just such you didn't know who the enemy was.
Exactly.
Now we had a lot come on. We had what they called bazaars that were on our post. They kind of brought the village in. And you could shop, get anything local if you wanted to get souvenir type things or things that you would use. I mean, they could find anything. You ask them, if they didn't have it, you ask them, they'd get it. Mm-hmm. But we did have, to kind of go back to your question, there were interactions with local nationals at the gates. On my second deployment, I was a gate guard for our post, a little bitty post there, right on the Tigris River. And we had a number of local nationals that would come in, and they would want to try and get money or not repercussion, but basically a payback for, say, if we accidentally had shot artillery and blew their car up. Well, the U.S. forces would pay for that. If they could prove it, we would pay for it. If someone was killed and they were just a civilian and they could prove that what we did caused that death, we gave back so much. That was just, not that money can buy a life, but
it was part of the hearts and minds.
Right, it was, accidents happen, things happen, we're gonna do what we can. And they would come in to the gate, we would, talk with them. Most of the time we would have to turn them away because they didn't have what they needed to get in. And then a lot of times you'd have kids from the neighborhoods come up. You always try to keep candy in your pocket. If the kids come up, you had to, the kids were kind of when you saw kids playing, you usually felt pretty good. When you didn't see kids playing, you kind of, you had to worry a little bit. Something was.
Just the word's out that something's going to go down.
Yeah, a lot of times. Not always, but a lot of times. You could kind of tell a lot of times when things were, something's fixing to happen.
Yeah.
There just wouldn't be anybody on the street. Usually somebody's out there sweeping this time of day and they're not sweeping today. Why is that? You try to piece all this stuff together. And again, you wouldn't just look at the one, that lady's not sweeping the porch this morning, what's going on?
Yeah.
But when she's not sweeping and they're not kicking the ball over here and this person's not, delivering his, whatever he'd be delivering at that certain time, and you put all that together, then you start.
Yeah.
All right, something's.
A lot of similarities with Vietnam. Same thing. Guys would know, the Vietnam vets will say, we knew that something was coming, because normally the village that's bustling is dead quiet.
Right.
So all the locals know something's going to go down.
Right. And it was, a lot of that was just, it was training that, this stuff had been happening, and that's what you get trained for. They would train you what to watch for, what not to watch for.
Yeah. Any other questions for Tom? Yeah.
How many firing batteries were you able to utilize, and how many guns were inside each firing battery?
Where we actually had we were kind of in the middle of our ownership. the land that we owned. We had probably, I don't know, maybe a quarter of it that was owned by us, but our guns couldn't fire into it, that we would call for another landowner that had guns close enough. Usually it was 4 guns. We would have 4 Paladins. I think it was 4. That would.
155 round.
Yep. Yeah, we had the 105, the howitzers there, but we never, I don't think the cover ever come off of them. I never saw them off. We had mortars that we did utilize mortars a little bit, but typically, unless it was just a super close action that we were going to fire on, the Paladin could reach it, and why not put a 155 down there if you can? So, yeah, it was mostly one battery that covered our entire area. But we did, and we had the same thing happened with others. There was certain land areas that they could reach that we didn't own, so we would fire in for them. So they would call us and ask for our guns to fire for them. So.
Any other questions, Tony? Yeah.
I mean, we saw this with like a bunch of the coalition forces. Do you have any interactions with other units from other countries?
Yeah. We the first deployment I was on a base called FOB, or it was called camp. It was a big, huge FOB, but we called it Camp Taji. Huge.
The forward operating base, right?
Yeah. But Taji was so big that we just called it a camp. I mean, it was huge. It was kind of set up to where the groups that you worked with, it was almost like neighborhoods of little bitty dorm rooms, if you will. And, Mayfield would be the 1st Cav, Walker would be, 82nd, and then, Hutch might be the Ukraines, or it may be the Ukraines and, Bosnia and some others that were down there. And they tried to keep everybody kind of with their group. They didn't mix and mingle, but you could go to those areas. We would go down there, and I don't want to say hang out because I don't know that we hung out with them, but you could if you wanted. You'd walk, if you were going to chow hall or something, a lot of times you'd walk through there. They'd say hi, you'd say hi. And then there were trainings that would go on. They, a lot of these countries that come over, they probably used it more as a training tool than an actual embedding tool to where they were part of the fight.
Yeah.
They kind of come over and would shadow you and learn, from us. And we would learn from them. You just kind of share what you did, how you did it. And so we got to do that some with some other coalition forces.
What countries do you remember? Soldiers from what countries do you remember?
It seems like Bosnia was a group that come in, saw some Brit flags, Australian, some Oriental countries, but I couldn't tell you which one they were from.
Yeah.
But, I saw the soldiers there. And again, Camp Taji was huge. You'd go to the chow hall and, there may be, there may be 500 people in the chow hall at once.
Yeah.
So you would see all kinds of,
You'd see it,
yeah.
It really was
whoever-
an international thing.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And Camp Taji was one of those, it was kind of a main base that you could push, people out of. So Taji was kind of a city, if you will, and then you went out to your smaller units from there.
Yeah.
So, and it was a stop for, if there was a group on a patrol, they may stop for chow and come in and eat chow there, and then they'd bump back out.
Yeah.
So you'd see all kinds of forces come in and out. And then, of course, Iraqi, the second tour I was on, it was what we called a joint operations base. And we actually shared it with the IA, the Iraqi Army. So we worked with them. I mean, we literally lived with them.
Did they seem like they were going to be able to hang in there on their own when you guys left?
you have to kind of look at it from their perspective. When you looked at it from our perspective, how rigid our military is, everybody's always dressed the same. Everybody acts a certain way. Everybody, the rules they're pretty strict. Everybody has a way of acting, and that's the way everybody acts. If you don't, you're going to get reprimanded. With them, it was kind of I'm not finding the word, but it was kind of a mixed bag of, people that were really serious about it, and then guys that were just kind of, I'm being forced to do this, I don't really want to do this, or even, hey, I'm just not that put together,
Doesn't that fit? We heard pretty much the same thing last week, didn't we? I think from Lieutenant Colonel Quayle. Yeah, I mean, one of our Iraq vets described the same thing. There are some guys you work with, their hearts are in it. You can trust them, and there are others, you just probably not.
Yeah, it wasn't they definitely had lots of work to do. Now, it's a very small portion that I worked with.
Yeah.
FOB War Eagle was a very, very small, or Job War Eagle was very, very small. It was tiny. It was a little bitty. So, I mean, for me to say the entire Iraqi Army is that way would be,
Right. Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to say that. But from what I saw and what I worked with, it was just a mixed bag of a bunch of people kind of where you would just throw people together and say, hey, clothes on and, start marching. And it's not going to look right. To where everybody's dressed the same, and you train for weeks how to march. And, everybody knows what to do, when to do it. And it was a little bit, but that's looking at it from my perspective,
Right.
from the U.S. Army perspective, and that doesn't necessarily mean that if you're not that way, that you're wrong.
But every Iraq vet I've talked to says the same thing. Yeah. Some are really into it, and others.
Yeah.
You just got to watch out. Any other questions? Last question then. Let's just talk about you're in this world that folks who haven't experienced it they can't understand. I mean, just to give you a trivial example. I mean, from just peacetime, after being out at sea for 6 months and living on an aircraft carrier with 5,000 just dudes at that time, just guys at that time, and seeing all kinds of crazy stuff, especially in the Philippines and Thailand. And then coming back to port, San Diego, getting off the ship, going into this little town called Coronado, going to a Mexican restaurant, and just looking around at the normal lives all these folks are having, and just thinking, where have I been the last 6 months? What have I been doing the last 6 months? And it almost, I don't know, I mean, you know what I'm getting at.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, but for you it's much more extreme because you're in a war zone. You're experiencing all that, and then you come home, and now you're in the cereal section at Walmart or something like that, and you know what I mean? So just reflect on that a little bit, just, coming from that kind of experience back to just normal American civilian life and, just kind of the process of that.
I'll be honest, the hardest thing for me at the beginning was, where's my weapon? I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and because you didn't lose your weapon, that was a bad day if you left your weapon somewhere.
Yeah.
So literally, it was never, it went to the shower with you, it went everywhere with you. And just that, I'd wake up in the middle of the night,
Seeing for your weapon.
just horrified.
How long did it take for that to stop?
It still happens every once in a while.
Really? Wow.
It's been a long time. Of course, I've been out now for
Yeah.
some years now, but it was years. Every once in a while, something would happen, and the wife would, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Where's my weapon?"
Wow.
She's like, "You don't have to have your weapon. You're home." But yeah, that was one of the things that I really struggled with. But two was just the freedom, being able to just make a choice, because when you're over there, you don't get to really make any choices.
Yeah.
I guess you get to pick if you want to have a burger or a ham sandwich, but you don't get to pick when you're going somewhere. You don't get to pick when you go to the shower. For the most part, you don't get to pick when you take a vacation or when you want to do something that's not, your normal scope of a day.
Yeah.
Those options just aren't there. You almost forget that that's part of life. You're just waiting on somebody to say something. I'm not going to do anything until I'm told to do it. And that freedom was just overwhelming getting back, and especially the second time when I actually was out.
Yeah.
And just having that freedom for what am I going to do today? No one's going to tell me what to do. I got to do this myself.
There are a lot of vets I've talked to, including one this Saturday, who said that's kind of one of the things they miss about the world of war is that in the world of war, the questions are really simple, right? And the decisions you have to make are really, really important, but there aren't a lot of them.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And another thing he said was really interesting. He said, when you're in a combat zone, there's no such thing as an existential crisis. Like what am I for, right? Because what you're for. When you get the call from the guys in the field who need fire on that mortar right now, you know that what you're doing is important.
Right.
And sometimes the vets come home and they say, what can I do in civilian life that is as important, as immediately as important as what I did back then?
Yeah.
So some kind of miss it in that way.
Yeah.
I know that you were, your 4 years in the Army, that was enough. And, for most Army guys, that's it. Or most folks who do the Army, that's one enlistment and then they're done. But have there ever been fleeting moments when you've kind of missed the intensity maybe of that first tour?
I think probably the negative of being separated from, family. I was married the entire time, so
Yeah.
me and the wife were separated the whole time.
Mm.
And I'm a family-oriented person. I like doing things with family, and
Yeah.
that separation and kind of did it for me. I was like, this isn't for me. It wasn't so much, I guess, war's not fun, but it wasn't so much the Army or even the war, but it was that separation. After 2 times, I was like, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go through that again.
Makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
So
Yeah.
there were times where I did want to go to warrant school and really thought hard about that. I wanted to fly helicopters.
Being a warrant officer? Yeah.
But usually it didn't get too far down the
That's very
too far down the tube
Last
before.
question: does Iraq show up in your dreams still?
Yep.
Do you have a
And they're not. It's not all.
scary.
I'll be honest with you. I was very, very fortunate. Some stories. There are guys that saw, way more than I did.
Yeah.
And all dreams are not events that had a negative connotation to it. It's things like the weapon, or even you missed your deployment plane. My entire night will be trying to traipse through the airport to get to that flight, and every single person in that airport is keeping me from it, and I'm just working to, those type dreams.
Yeah.
And it's things like that more than,
Yeah.
because I was fortunate I didn't have the really terrible
Right.
job that a lot of guys had that
Yeah.
impacts them. There's always aspects of war that's terrible,
Yeah.
and every single person that's included in that gets a piece of that. But there are definitely guys that saw way more than me and had to do way more than me, that they struggle with things that I don't.
Well, sometimes the dreams can be terrible, and sometimes they can be stupid. So.
Oh, a lot of them are very stupid,
so
but yeah, it's
I'll tell the students my recurring dream. This started about 18 years ago, and I still have it. It's just a totally stupid dream. It's not serious at all. But I'm supposed to get out of the Navy, and I've got a piece of paper, and I can't get out of the Navy until somebody signs this piece of paper. And so I'm just walking around the ship trying to find the right person to sign this piece of paper. and never find them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so the dream just keeps going, just trying to find this one person. So, I mean, you know, peacetime, wartime, and then of course within war there are different levels of intensity within it. But still, it's a big part of your life, right?
Yep.
And you experience things that you're just not going to experience in the civilian
Oh
world.
yeah.
You know.
Yep. I wouldn't trade it, but I wouldn't want to go back and do it again.
Glad you did it. But
I'm
that's-
glad I did it, but I would hate to know that I had to go through that again.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody have a last question for Tony before we go? Yeah.
Might be kind of a stretch, but just with the freedom thing you mentioned, do you see any potential correlation with how, like, freedom for you was kind of shocking and overwhelming to how maybe freedom in Iraq was a little difficult to deal with for the actual nationals there, and how there's kind of been some problems reoccurring, even though they've kind of had some freedom, now it's kind of shifting back to the similar problems?
I guess my thoughts on freedom are probably more, they should be that big. They're usually, you know, where am I going to eat kind of freedoms. The Army's not going to tell me I got to go to that chow hall tonight. I'm going to go to McDonald's or to the restaurant. I guess for me to relate to that question, it would be more on the aspect of seeing and knowing that guys went over with me that didn't come back home, and was it worth losing them for what freedom, like you talked about, what we thought we were giving them, which is now almost just, it almost looks like it's just going to turn back to the way it was before. So you kind of question and say, was this really worth it? You know, did you know, he lose his life for some cause, or did he lose his life just for a small speck of hope? And now it's reverberated back to the way it was before he lost his life. Does that make sense?
What's
So
your
I guess,
answer?
ooh, boy. To be a part of it and to know what I gave, and nothing like a lot of guys gave, arms, legs, sight, life. To know what I gave, I want there to be something there. I want it to be worth something. But I think for a lot of us, it's kind of one of those where we look back and we're like, maybe this wasn't for anything. You know, maybe this was all for naught. You know, we don't want it to be. I sure don't want it to be, because I had buddies that didn't come back. I had people that I knew that didn't make it back, and ones that made it back, but they're not whole. And you don't want it to be, you don't want to have to look at them and remember them and say, you know, this was, because they did. I'm not saying that they died for nothing. That's not what I'm saying, or that they gave what they gave for nothing. It's just, you would like to have that where you look over there and you see peace, and you see the growth of what this flower that you tried to plant, and you see it start sprouting. Instead, you're almost seeing this flower that you planted just, you know, die. So, does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I hope it doesn't make me sound like
No,
I said
mean,
somebody
you know,
gave something for nothing. I don't think any guy has ever, in any war, gave something for nothing. But I wish that there was more that we could look back and say, yeah, we did good. We did a good thing. We changed, you know, a country. We changed the world, you know, for the better. And I don't know that we can see that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the story's still playing out.
Yeah, and there's good things going on over there. There's still guys over there that work with those guys, and
Yeah.
you know, I think there are lots of people over there that want what we wanted to give them.
Yeah.
There's just a whole lot of people that don't want it, and that are fighting to make sure that doesn't happen. So,
I mean, you can help give a place a shot, but you can't
right,
force all the folks to
right.
do that, so. Anything else, guys? We call it? Well, Tony, thank you very much for coming in and talking with us.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Thank